Saint Francis of Assisi, born in the city of Assisi, Italy, July 5, 1182, is a Catholic friar who founded the order Fratrum Minorum in 1209. His followers are called Franciscans. He is the patron saint of animals, trade, and the environment. One day, he heard a sermon from the book of Matthew chapter 10:9. In the sermon, Jesus Christ taught his followers that they must go preach the gospel throughout the world, and they were advised not to bring money, sticks, or wear shoes. Saint Francis also decided to surrender himself to the life of poverty and apostolate by wearing dirty clothes, barefoot, not carrying money, sticks and supplies. A friend of his, young Bernardo de Quintavalle, joined the order. He donated everything he owned to the work. Likewise with the other members.
The Gospel of Mark is the second Gospel in the New Testament of the Christian Bible. Although it is the second book, many scholars consider it to be the earliest written of the New Testament books. The Gospel of Mark is classified in the Synoptic Gospels together with the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. The author of this Gospel is Mark, also called John, nephew of Barnabas, co-worker of Paul, and whom Simon Peter called his son, that is, his spiritual son or closest disciple. The Gospel of Mark, together with the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, is often referred to as the Synoptic Gospels, because of the similarities in the content of the three books. Traditionally, John Mark is believed to have written this book between 64–67. According to the writings of Augustine of Hippo, the early church thought that this gospel was written after Matthew wrote the Gospel of Matthew. Since the late 19th century, some scholars have argued that Mark's Gospel is the earliest written Gospel, and the other two synoptic Gospels use Mark's Gospel as their source. Mark wrote this Gospel primarily for the Greeks or Greeks and other Greek-speaking nations in the Roman Empire, in contrast to Matthew apparently who wrote for the Jews. This can be seen from the choice of words used, the references to the Old Testament that are included, the explanation of the customs of the Jews which are addressed to non-Jews. The two major themes in Mark's Gospel are the secrecy of Jesus as the Messiah and the slowness of his disciples to understand him. In this Gospel, Jesus is often quoted as ordering his disciples not to tell anyone his identity as the Messiah.
The Septuagint is a translation of the Old Testament into Greek, which is thought to have been translated around the 3rd century BC. The Septuagint was written in Alexandria, Egypt, to meet the needs of the Greek-speaking diaspora Jews. The Septuagint can also be written with the Roman numeral LXX, meaning 70. Because it is estimated to be translated by about 72 people in a period of about 72 days. Ptolemy II Philadelphos wrote a letter to the high priest in Jerusalem. In order to send scrolls of the Torah, Old Testament, and choose 6 people each. Scholars who are fluent in Hebrew and Greek from every tribe of Israel, 12 tribes, so that the number of these scholars is 72 people. Reportedly these translators worked separately and were inspired by God so that each translator translates the same text with the same words, as if they were dictated together. Even all the letters used in each such translation is exactly the same. It is estimated that only the books of the Pentateuch were worked on in Alexandria, then gradually the books of the Old Testament were also translated. Others until about 100 BC. The Jews of Alexandria welcomed the Septuagint with open arms. However, the Jews in Palestine rejected it because they only recognized the Hebrew versions. Some parts of the Septuagint may exhibit Semitism, or expressions and phrases based on the Semitic language family such as Hebrew and Aramaic. Other books such as the Book of Daniel and Proverbs shows a greater influence of the Greek language. Koine Jewish Greek is found primarily as a literary category or a cultural category. However, despite the existence of several different religious vocabularies, the difference is not very big compared to other variants of Koine Greek. So it cannot be called a separate dialect. The Septuagint can also explain the pronunciation of pre-Masoretic Hebrew. Many self-names are spelled with Greek vowels in the LXX, whereas modern Hebrew texts do not have vowel pointers. Along with the development of translation work, the canon of the Greek Bible was expanded. The Torah, Pentateuch in Greek, has always maintained its primacy as the basis of the canon, but a collection of prophetic or prophetic writings based on the Jewish Nevi'im has various hagiographical works incorporated into it. In addition, several newer books were included in the Septuagint, which are called Anagignos Kamina in Greek because they are not part of the Jewish canon. Among these books are the Book of Maccabees and the Wisdom of Jesus son of Sirach. Septuagint versions of several biblical books such as Daniel and Esther. Also longer than in the Masoretic text, it is not known when the Ketuvim writings, the final 3 parts of the Jewish canon were composed. Although some sort of selective process should have been applied because of the Septuagint. Does not include other well-known Jewish documents, such as the books of Enoch and the Jubilee or other writings that do not belong to the Jewish canon. These books are now classified as pseudepigrapha, since late antiquity has been associated with the Council of Jamnia. Mainstream Rabbinic Judaism rejected the Septuagint as a valid Jewish biblical text for several reasons. The first reason, they confirmed there were some mistranslations. The second reason is that the Hebrew source texts use the Septuagint in some cases, especially the Book of Daniel. different from the Masoretic tradition of the Hebrew texts which the Jewish rabbis endorsed canonical. A third reason the rabbis wanted to distinguish their tradition from the newly formed Christian tradition. Then the rabbis claimed Hebrew as a However, in the end Aramaic was also given the status of a sacred language, equivalent to Hebrew. As a result of this doctrine, various translations of the Torah into Koine Greek by the Jewish rabbis preserved only in the form of rare fragments today. Over time, the LXX became synonymous with the Greek Old Testament. That is, the canon of Christian writings, which includes all the books of the Jewish canon along with additional texts. The Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches include most of the books included in the Septuaginta into their canon, but Protestant churches generally do not include it. After the Protestant Reformation, many Protestant hidden but became synonymous with of questionable validity. The Apocrypha is accompanied by a separate title. In the King James Version of the Bible, which is the basis for the Revised Standard Version, most ancient copies of the Bible contain the Septuagint version of the Old Testament. The Book of Daniel's preface to the Vulgate It Just Happened. Several ancient Greek texts from the Book of Daniel have been rediscovered recently, and now work is underway on the reconstruction of the original form of the book. The canonical Ezra Nehemiah is known in the Septuagint as Esdras B and 1 Esdras is Esdras A. 1 Esdras is a text very similar to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and scholars widely consider both to be derived from the same original text. There is a view, and it is considered very likely by scholars, that Esdras B, canonical Ezra and Nehemiah, is Theodosian's version of this material, and Esdras A is a version previously contained in the Septuagint itself. The pre-Christian Jews Philo and Josephus considered the Septuagint to be on an equal footing with the Hebrew text. The Septuagint manuscripts were found among the Qumran scrolls in the Dead Sea, and is thought to have been used among the Jews at that time. Beginning in the 2nd century, several factors have led most Jews to abandon the use of the LXX. Early Gentile Christians used the LXX because it was the only Greek version of the Bible at that time, and most, or all, of them could not read Hebrew. The LXX's association with a rival religion might make it suspected in the eyes of Jewish scholars and the Jewish people. From a later generation, the Jews, on the other hand, used the later Targum texts, compiled by the Masoretes, as well as authoritative Aramaic translations, such as the works of Aklos and Rabbi Jonathan ben Uziel. The Greek-speaking Jews themselves tended to prefer other Greek-speaking Jewish versions of the LXX, such as Aquila's 2nd century translation, which seems to be more in line with contemporary Hebrew texts. Episode 1, About History, Orthodox Church. We will discuss Apostolic Church in the Bible, film. The Apostolic Church. The history of the Christian Church begins with the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles in Jerusalem at the feast, Pentecost, the first, Whit Sunday. On the same day, through St. Peter's sermon, 3,000 men and women were baptized, and the first Christian community in Jerusalem was formed. Shortly thereafter, members of the Jerusalem church were torn apart by persecution, which was followed by the stoning of St. Stephen. Go therefore, Christ has said,
and make disciples of all nations.
Obedient to this commandment, they preached wherever they went, at first to the Jews, but soon to the Gentiles as well. Some of these apostolic travel accounts are recorded by St. Luke in the book of Acts, others are preserved in the tradition of the church. In a very short time, small Christian communities sprang up in all the major centers of the Roman Empire and even in places outside the Roman borders.